Great. This is the first time we've had a dog on stream, so I'm excited for a chance to interview a dog about making emotional characters in VR. But that's kind of actually, you know what? Like, that's not a bad jumping off point. Like, people like dogs, people like cats, people like animals. They get attached to them, and you've all worked on shows and studios that have the job of getting people hooked in really quickly on complex ideas using sometimes dogs and cats. Could you sort of explain what your talk is about and why it has to relate with my stupid little connection here between dogs and your talk?
Well, the easiest way to elicit an emotional response is to kill a dog or a pet.
Oh my God, no! Please don't do that. Not.
No, I'm just saying, it's super easy. That's how you can get people invested.
That's the easy way. We don't want to go the easy way.
Pull the old yeller.
Yeah. I think we learned working with some of the best writers over at Pixar. You watch that the most important fundamental thing for them is you have to have the audience drawn in very quickly. You have to build some sort of an emotional connection between the viewer and the film. Otherwise, you'll lose them, and it's sort of the film passes by and it's not really impactful. I think the examples we can use. I mean, there's tons of them, but to me, I think Up is probably the best example of, I wouldn't say emotional manipulation, but the first 10 minutes, basically, you're seeing an entire life between these, from kids to elderly age. The wife, and there's no dialogue, and that's the genius part of it. It's
there's a little dialogue, but not much. No.
Yeah, in the beginning, there's maybe a few lines, but it's just watching this life between this couple go by and all sort of the trials and tribulations.
As it addresses infertility
right.
and
death.
Yeah, death, old age. It's like, oh my God.
Right. And then
first 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And, if you're not sort of emotionally connected to Carl at the end of that montage, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So, and I think that our talk in general it lends itself to sort of VR, because now in virtual reality, we sort of lose the framing and sort of the boundaries of a traditional two-dimensional screen. So immersion is, inherent. However, that's great, and we see a lot of titles out there that are using the immersion for, fun elements, and that's cool too. Mm-hmm. It's the first, I think, stepping stone. However, we're also starting to see, projects that are out there that are being used to elicit the emotional response within their narrative. Like, prime example, Pearl, our friend David Eisenman was a producer on Pearl, which was Google Spotlight Stories. It was a VR short, and they just got nominated for the Academy Award. And Patrick Osborne had directed that. We were lucky enough to do a little previs on that project. But that is a prime example of being able to use sort of emotion and tie that in with full immersion. And I think that worked really successfully. And for us, as game makers, you have to be able to sort of tie that emotional response into VR, because it just makes sense, right? We're fully immersed, and then on top of it, it's like, okay, we can elicit emotion and use that as well to bring the viewer in, right?
So I think what I want to know most, and we'll try to not steal too heavily from the talk you're going to give, but I'm super curious to know how you guys came to be a game development studio in the first place. It seems like you rest very heavily on your years and years of experience at places like Pixar and stuff, making films. So why make the jump to game development a couple of years ago? Why go on this venture,
this magical journey?
Yeah, like what is it about games that is more appealing to you than working on very emotionally affecting films?
Well, it's funny. It really started with us while we were all at Pixar wanting to work on our own project, something that we were in control of. Because for years we were doing other people's ideas. And while we got our little group together, it became apparent that we could make a simple game in Unity. We had some story ideas. It seemed to be the right place for us. Instead of going out and making a short, and then it just kind of developed naturally. We did a carve-out while we were all working together, so we're on the up and up, and we did it at night after work. And we really enjoyed that process.
It was a sort of a weird I don't know, amalgam of opportunities that sort of happened. Our other partner, Josh Gualtieri, Jason, and myself, I mean, we're all avid gamers, right? We all have been. Even at Pixar, we would play, we would talk about games more than we would actually talk about film. Mm-hmm. And we had this strange opportunity because Josh and I taught at a school called Expression College in Emeryville outside of our normal hours at the studio. And these were students who were doing, 3D animation, 3D graphics, things like that. So we got to the point where we found ourselves, with these students and wanting to get into gaming. And then there was a sort of the revolution of the game engine in which, not too long ago, if you wanted to make a game, it was almost impossible with the amount of costs it would incur to getting an access to an engine, getting on a console, things like that. Right. But with sort of combination of access, having a portal like Steam, having engines that are now accessible to you without having to spend like $50,000, $60,000 a cut, seat. Having a bunch of students, that they graduated and they wanted to work in games as well. So we had this small pool of talent. We had the ability, Pixar gave us the ability to sort of work on this project outside of our 9 to 5 at the studio. And we were lucky enough to also find a publisher, Ripstone out of the UK, and we made our first mobile title. So the desire was always there. We were always avid gamers. Film is a passion of ours. However, like Jason said, when you're working on somebody else's project, it's their vision, right? So you're there in service to their art, their desires, their dreams. And eventually, I think everybody sort of wants to captain their own ship, especially creatively. And I think games gave us, since we love games, and it gave us the ability to iterate and make them feasibly, right? Like you said, we can't make a film. Making a short, is prohibitive as well. So this was our natural progression, I think.
Yeah. Before we move on, I gotta ask, what is the game community like at Pixar? Like, I would imagine a lot of people are looking to games in terms of like graphic design and graphical achievements, but like, do a lot of people there play games? Were you guys one of the many?
I bet they play Magic a lot. I bet there's a lot of Magic.
No, not Magic.
No,
not Magic. Not much. There was a decent board game community that also played Pathfinder a lot.
Oh.
We had a group called the Dandies, the D&D. And I think probably 3 out of 5 days of the week we were doing lunchtime Pathfinder games, run by 6 different GMs. We'd all talk to each other. It was pretty slick. For video games, we had a huge World of Warcraft guild. We had a guild that had, I think it was 300 characters that were in the guild. A ton of people at work.
When I hate to sidetrack this again, but Brian's going to kill me. But like, I have become recently fascinated with the idea that tabletop, the time people spend playing tabletop games together is influencing the work they do as video game designers. Almost every game designer or game developer in general I talk to either played tabletop role-playing games growing up or still plays them now. Do you think your time playing those games has significantly influenced the way you approach game design at all?
Oh, absolutely. I actually, I think I've kept every board game that I've ever received, like through my entire life. Like, I still have my Hero Quest. I've got my old Clue Master Detective games from the 80s. I have, I'd say, probably 400 board games in my collection to go through my Board Game Geek profile. And I also kickstarted a board game a couple years ago, a horror slasher game called Camp Grizzly that was a really, really big success.
Tim Schafer loves it.
Yeah, I got to go play with Tim Schafer. Yeah, they play games all the time over there too at Double Fine.
Tabletop gaming, which is funny you mentioned that. So our other partner, Josh, who unfortunately he's in meetings today, Jason and Josh actually co-started a company called ZombieSmith, which is a tabletop gaming company. So our first VR game, which is a turn-based strategy game, which is called Quar Battle for Gate 18, that's actually based on the IP created by ZombieSmith. So there is an entire line of miniatures and tabletop gaming rules for that game. So if you look at Quar and then you go to Zombie Smith, you can actually get the miniatures.
Behind this wall right here, there are guys spinning metal. We've got spin casters right over there. They're doing pewter figures right now.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
cool.
tabletop gaming.
Tabletop game is very important.
Our chat agrees with you. Rhetoric wants to point out that tabletop gaming develops the understanding of what rules are, which translates to mechanics as well. Funny enough, it's actually something I've been dwelling on lately. I've been getting into X-Wing miniatures myself and like getting excited about how expressive even a game like that can be. And I just want to remind anyone in chat, if you have any questions for the Steel Bull team, feel free to ask them, and I will bring them into the conversation. But now I want to as we've wandered into the world of tabletop, I want to just take my vaudeville cane and pull us back on stage to talk about VR real quick.
That outside this wall, I can see X-Wing is set up on a table. So.
Nice. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I literally just got into it. Maybe I'll bring my kit to GDC. Maybe we'll play around. So I want to ask. So this is my biggest thing about VR storytelling is I personally have been very excited by stuff I've seen from developers like yourselves. But I've always wanted to ask people. One of the questions I ask developers working on these kind of experiences: how do you deal with the fact that if the player wanted, while a really cool scene is happening in a VR experience or a gamer experience, they could go into the corner and look at the wall? How do you deal with that? How do you cope with that?
This is something that we've had internal discussions about this, and this is, I don't think there's any right answer. A lot of people think that what you need to do is you have to draw attention to the action. So what you could do is if you're looking away, the action pauses, and then when you go back, the action restarts, or you have some sort of visual cue or audio cue. I kind of tend to think of, I like the ability to let the player choose, right? If it also allows you, since these experiences, if you miss something, you can go back and revisit it. But if you go to, I think my analogy is always, if I bring you to a bar and there's a bunch of people having conversations and things like that, right? And all of a sudden a knife fight breaks out, right? Chances are you're not going to be staring at the corner. You're probably going to be you're probably going to focus attention to the action in the area.
Yeah.
So it's you want to lead people a little bit to where they kind of need to be focused on, but you don't want to be heavy-handed. And I think with VR, we have to sort of get rid of some of the concepts of editing and being able to allow the player to be free to sort of choose what they're looking at. And if you've done a bad job, then the truth is that box in the corner might be more interesting than what you're showing me. So we then failed.
You just have to make sure that it's not more exciting than what's happening.
could be a good box, though.
I actually have a background in theater, and I feel that a lot of the rules of stage applies a little bit more than film and editing, and as far as drawing focus, or if you've ever been to a production that was done in the round, or on a thrust stage, it's like it really is like involving the player in more of a theatrical production than you are in a standard television or film experience.
Yeah.
But then also, in regards to the how do you stop somebody from looking away from the action, well, it's no different than TV either.
Right.
Because I could just sit here and play whatever game, and I could look down at my cat or my dog or whatever and start to get disengaged. So we have to make sure that the material is engaging enough that you don't want to miss it.
My girlfriend does it with her. I don't know how she does it. She watches TV while she's on the phone. On the phone, I'm sitting there. I'm like, but
yeah. Well, I've definitely seen some immersive projects where if you look away, it won't continue. They don't stop the line, but when a character hits the end of that line of dialogue, they're going to wait for you to look back before they continue, especially if the character is directly trying to talk to you in the game.
Yeah.
If you're just there and there's a scene happening, they can ignore you, to an extent.
Yeah. I think, you want to try and make it the whole point of having full immersion is to try and be as natural as you can make it, right? If you start adding these breaks, right, you're going to then inherently pull yourself out. I mean, it's the same problem you have when you're doing an RPG, right? As beautiful as Witcher 3 is, you still have dialogue trees that you have to sit there and read and wait while they're sort of idling, waiting for you to respond, right? So you can have, there's that immersion, and to me, there's something a little bit lost in that, as much as those are my favorite kind of games. So I think I'd rather err on the side of being more natural, even if the risk is somebody might miss something.
Now, the game that we released at the end of November called Bounce, which is in VR, and it's really a puzzle game. We decided to approach our storytelling a little differently. What we did there was we took the story to the background. There's no dialogue. If you're looking for it and you pay attention, you're going to pick up on a couple of characters and their interactions, which are on loops because they're little robots. And if you spot them out of the corner of your eye, you're not going to miss their portion of the story.
Right.
So it's not like they're repeating the same line of dialogue over and over, but you could totally miss the story in the game if you weren't looking for it.
Until you get to the end. It's a
little bit more of an Easter egg,
But if you get to the end and you realize the climax of the story, you're probably like, I probably missed a few things. I should go back.
But what we're hoping in Bounce is that what people feel is like a little bit of a melancholy and a loneliness, because there is nobody approaching you and talking to you. You get one direct interaction at the very beginning of the game, and then that's about it.
Right.
Nobody really pays attention to you. It needs, you feel like you're alone in this space, in the spaceship.
Right. We intentionally tried to manipulate the player. Actually, Bounce, you're there to pretty much help this cute little spherical robot that you meet at the very beginning. There's no exposition as to who you are, why you're there, what you're supposed to be doing. However, the cute little robot is like Gizmo from the Gremlins, right? You look at it, it's like, oh my God, it's just adorable. My natural emotional response is I have to help, cute things. And then the payoff at the very end is basically by helping the cute thing.
Spoilers,
but I think we could talk about it. Since we're talking about story here, it's okay. We basically turn that on its head, showing you that your natural instinct to help something cute might be actually catastrophic. So
what have you been doing this whole time?
Right.
Were you thinking about what you were doing, or are you just doing it?
Are you doing something because you think it was cute? And it's like saving a puppy, but maybe that puppy turns out to be Hitler. I don't know, something like Hitler puppy.
Don't ruin our next title.
Okay,
Hitler, geez.
Hold on. Hitler puppy. Okay.
Chris, this question might be directed towards you. Have you noticed any major pipeline changes within development for VR versus quote-unquote standard development? That question comes from Rhetoric in the chat.
Yeah, I think there are pipeline differences because you actually have to bring it into a 3D space where you're actually looking at 360. Whereas before, you're just looking at a screen, and it could be side-scrolling or you're turning around. But now, you're actually having to figure out what's going on behind the player, but you don't know where behind the player is.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of thought that goes into that, trying to figure out how do we play this whole space rather than just what we're forcing them to look at.
Do you get any opportunities to use the tools like, I think if I'm remembering right, it's Unreal's like VR editor where you're hopping in there and like physically dropping assets into space and then letting it go? Do you get to work with any tools like that?
No, we still keep our traditional pipeline is still relatively the same. We build our assets in Maya, we bring them into Unity, we dress them. The thing is that on certain points, we've played around a little bit with the direct manipulation in VR. It's great in one aspect. It speeds up one aspect, but it slows down another aspect. Our artists are so comfortable and they understand 3D space very well. So when they're set dressing it and they're aware of the camera, even though they're looking at an isometric view when they're putting things together, their mind knows where they're putting it, where it goes, and what's going to be seen in the camera. Whereas going directly into VR, it's great if you're sort of putting things specifically for a camera position. But I think we actually work faster just in the traditional way. I think it's because that's the way they learn, and that's how their workflow has been.
Now, for animation, on the other hand, we actually did develop our own tool that we're calling CART.
Yeah.
And that's a tool that we created so we could do all of our animation reviews in VR.
Well, mostly because what we were finding is we were doing animation reviews in Maya on a 2D screen, and then we'd get it into Unity and look at it in VR, and we're like, this looks not even like what it was looking like originally. I mean, the pacing, the movement, how drastic or how not drastic an arm move seemed really different in VR. So we would have to adjust. So we realized we needed a regular schedule of reviewing in VR.
Right. It's like the difference between shooting for television, which is really close, or, there's a lot of stuff, or shooting for film traditionally, where people have to do bigger, exaggerated, movements and facial expressions, or theater, which is, to the back of the theater, the guy at the back of the audience needs to see that you're angry, and
Yeah.
Right. The goal for our animators are to get into VR as soon as possible to see their animation cycles, and what they're working on. For the asset artists, it's still pretty much the same thing. A set is a set. A model's a model, shading, right? So when we're putting sets together, that's when we want to go into VR to be able to see it. But when we're building all the building blocks, it's okay, traditionally just to work on our normal workflow.
Oh man, like how many VR experiences have you been in where the animated characters are so over the top because you're in the space with them, and it might have worked when it was on your television, but now you're in their space and there's a lot of
Right. Well, it's like when they do, when they started doing the 3D films, right? The first inclination for the DPs is the arrow shot towards the viewer, right? It's because
have you played Resident Evil in VR?
No.
I got a knife. Like, okay.
So I think a lot of those sort of things, people will utilize those first, and I think we're a little bit more trying to be subtle.
Yeah, we want to be more subtle.
That's so interesting because I feel like when I talk to VR devs, they tend to skew the other way, which is that when you have a player in a full 3D space and you can't really, you should not control their head at all or where they look. You need to compensate for that by sort of like making the really putting a lot of emphasis on what's going on in a particular corner, like creating scenes that draw the player in a very arresting way. And I want to go back a little bit and like kind of dig into your thoughts on this being like theater in the round. Like, what kind of experience have you guys had studying theater and doing theater, and how has that sort of influenced the way you build things in VR?
I was actually a theater major.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we're going way back, man. Yeah. I had a triple concentration. I had studied as a director for stage, as well as an actor for stage. I wanted to get both sides. And my third concentration was in puppetry. So it totally applies.
It does.
Definitely.
It does. I loved it. There was a point where I was Audrey 2, the plant, on stage at summer stock. And I was the head puppeteer. It was fantastic. But it is that kind of, all those tricks that you would use about staging for theater really apply to VR. Like, you don't want to have a bunch of talking heads standing the whole time. If you watch a theatrical production, you notice that people move around the stage and they compensate for different levels. Like, if somebody walks across and picks up a paper to look at, maybe the character you're not supposed to pay attention to is then going to sit down and lean against a table. So they're a little bit lower. You help guide the eye, help with the focus. I need to be watching the person looking at this paper, right? You can also use lighting tricks. Really, if you're on stage and somebody comes down, they need to do like a big soliloquy, drop the lights on everybody, spotlight. You can do that in VR as well. And you don't have to do big over-the-top animations, but you can do it with lighting, you can do it with sound.
I think on balance, a practical, use of that was when we were doing the tutorial. The goal was, we don't want to drag the player by the nose to where they have to go. However, we do need them to look at certain areas at a certain time, specifically during the tutorial, right? During the rest of the game, it was okay for them to not pay attention to the animations or the story elements. But, we did that with a combination of timing of screens. Like screens popped up and went down, which then, as they went down or they changed, it drew the eye line to where the next place you had to look. Lighting, since lighting was always one of my backgrounds in 3D, sort of theatrically speaking, you can use it. It doesn't have to be as ham-fisted as big spotlight, everything to black. It could very much be a color shift, right, where everything is lit in cool lighting, and then the warm lighting, the only source of warm light is focused on this one area, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a harsh spotlight, but your eye is naturally going to be, if you're in a cool color scheme, you're going to naturally go to a warm color scheme just inherently, right? So you can use those things to bring you there.
It's like looking at a candle in a blue-colored room, then, like the quickest explanation. Yeah.
Exactly.
My next question for you all. We were talking earlier about how your pipeline involves getting your artists to look at assets in VR as soon as possible. How do you accommodate for the fact that while working or being in VR, the motion sickness problem is still being worked on? It's better than ever. Like, we have the Vive, we have all these things that keep us from throwing up. But how do you deal with the fact that in your everyday work, like, your artist, if they're trying to work as best as they can, might expose themselves to a bad time and become physically ill?
So medical insurance is for.
We actually don't have that problem here.
Yeah.
Everything we're doing, we're creating for the Vive first.
Right. But doesn't that still? I mean, like the Vive isn't perfect. Like I've had some bad days in the Vive.
We know it depends on the experience. You can have drop frames.
We're not doing first-person shooters or roller coaster rides, like.
No, but I understand that. But the question is that we still experiment. So
yeah,
I think Davey probably has the most sensitive. He's probably the most. Davey and Chris are the most sensitive to motion sickness.
They stick me in, and they're like, "Do you feel sick?" Yes, I do.
Yeah, so,
if she throws up, we screwed up.
Right. Well, to back up the question is how. I mean, like at Pixar, the odds of throwing up during the workday were like near zero. I mean, unless
there were a lot of bars.
Oh.
Like 12 bars. Yeah.
Okay. Bars, except, but like that is a shit. But like, how do you deal with the fact that like now there's even a slightly higher odds than normal? Like, I mean, like we can talk about how health insurance is great. I'm glad like you seem to be looking out for your employees. But how do you sort of conceptualize in your head and sit there and go, we're doing great work, but in the course of our work, we could make ourselves feel bad.
We actually spend a limited amount of time in VR.
Yeah.
So we're doing reviews. And a review session might not take more than a half hour to an hour, with everybody looking at one big screen on the wall, one person in the headset, and we're all seeing what that person's seeing. But as long as we don't have a bunch of, like if we're doing an asset review, the reviewer is standing there and they're fully in control of their movement in the space without a lot of motion that might make them sick. Right. Like we do a lot of still locations.
I also think, I mean, at this point, we were lucky enough to be one of the first developers to get Valve's pre-pro model. Like, I mean, we were the core demo that we did for GDC 2015 was on the initial reel that Valve had. So there was about 5 developers that we were lucky enough to get like the pre Vive. So we had been working really, really early on, and we've sort of been able to figure out, okay, what are the things that we know kind of will make you sick?
We avoid it.
Right, and the thing is, we avoid it. So like there was one example for Quar, we were doing sort of a simple intro cinematic, and we had it where the viewer was watching the 2 characters sort of interact. And then as a character walked off, the camera, which was you, sort of flew into the sky and to see the base, right? It followed the trajectory of the character. And I remember the first thing I got in there. I'm like, oh, that's not feeling good, right? Cher, the CEO of HTC, actually saw it. She goes, everything is great. She goes, I don't like that one piece though. That one part was not making me feel good. So and so at that point we know, okay, what we can't do is we can't have the camera, by camera we mean viewer, be able to look around as if they're there and then all of a sudden just transport them, right? You can teleport, you can let them move themselves by locomotion. You can't transport them as they have free range of motion, made them sick. So,
and we rely on blinks. So if you're going to teleport, there's a blink during the actual movement of the teleport that covers the movement that might make you sick too.
Right, and that was one of the things we learned early. Like if we have to go from one location down over there, we did the instant teleportation, and then that was like, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
All right, what do we got to do? Add, I think there was a very specific time frame for a blink that makes it feel like, okay, it gives you enough time to readjust your brain to being at the new location. There's all kinds. I mean, there's a bunch of other devs have done really good, types of locomotion, and I think we're all sort of right now in the same realm. I mean, you are still stuck to having to do, for the most part, teleportation. But this is a long story around the big question: how do we prevent people from getting sick? We haven't really had that issue too much. Early on when we had it, we sort of hit a few things. We were like, oh, that's making us feel a little queasy. So we already know now at this point what to avoid.
Yeah.
Right.
I have heard and I have read that drinking ginger beer or like a ginger ale, before playing anything in VR can help. It helps with motion sickness, apparently. Because we do a lot of VR here, but then at home I was playing on the PSVR, and I was playing like Rush of Blood. I got like 2 minutes into it, and the first time a roller coaster does a little dip, I was like, okay, and we're taking this off.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Now, when we do VR drinking games in the studio, that if you puke, that has nothing to do with VR. I'm just going to say that's probably the tequila.
Man, that is something that we should just put on the videos online. We should have done a thing.
No, we should not put those videos.
I just want the record to note that I went for the facepalm right when I heard the words VR drinking game.
Yeah, how does the VR drinking game even work? Like, you have the headset on. Do you just have to trust someone else to get the shot in your mouth, or?
Yeah, and you better hope that it's tequila. That's in the
Oh, God.
Stand in the circle and hope they don't get vomited on.
Yeah. Alex, do you have a question, or I was going to jump to my next question?
No, go for it. I just
No, yeah.
overwhelmed by mental images right now.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this next question for the three of you. I went to a great talk at VRDC last year that dealt with accessibility in VR experiences. How do you all? I mean, we just sort of talked about how you have to test your VR products for the most sensitive people. How do you all see an intersection between the storytelling work you do and the accessibility design you do? Because now they're going hand in hand.
It's a hard question. I mean, I don't know. Let you handle this one. I'll let you handle this one.
Well, it's funny. We've been having these conversations about the age group, because you are not like allowed to have anybody 13 and younger in VR.
Yeah.
So you can't make any material that is like targeted and do like something that would be traditionally a family type of game, right? So you need to skew a little bit more adult.
Yeah.
With Bounce, we like to talk about our games as being whimsical. So it's like, it's not kids, it's not like really harsh, heavy adult themes, but it's this kind of like sweet spot of being in your late teens, 20s.
Dark Crystal, sort of. I mean, if you were to look at analogy, Dark Crystal is a prime example.
Yeah.
How's it, just to make sure my question's clear though, like this doesn't just always also have to deal with tone, but like someone once the metaphor someone once gave me was that like they were because a developer that they were working with had not assumed they'd be testing for children, they had not tested for height very well in their game, and so the person who was testing, like a reporter comes in and she was 5 foot something, like or in the upper 4 feet, and then she was like, I can't see your stuff, and they were like, "Oh crap!" And how do you all deal with that as you're working on your main story stuff?
So Quar, the tabletop game, right?
Yeah.
We actually have an option in there to adjust the table height.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire world will reset to where you want it to be if you're shorter or if you're taller. That was an easy one. Bounce is a game where we're physically moving objects we're moving objects in virtual space, trying to solve puzzles. And it might seem like, if I'm really tall, this could be easier, or maybe I can't accomplish a puzzle because I can't put a board or a ramp in the right spot. What we had done is we actually, our designer made the entire game so it could be played successfully by somebody who was
3 feet.
3 feet tall. Yeah.
And we had somebody actually sit on the floor.
Like on their
and
knees.
play the
Yeah.
game.
And play through the whole game.
That was that was our concern. I mean, Chris is, I think, what, 4'3" or something like that. So
She's taller than that, I'm sure.
so
Yeah.
Chris, cool. Chris, sorry. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. Chris, do you have to? How do you react when your colleagues wind up testing something, going it's fine, and you go no, it's not? How do you feel about that?
No, well, that did happen in Bounce. I was trying to solve one of the puzzles, and I was sitting there, and I was jumping. I was like, no, I really think that if I jump, I can get this thing to where it should be. And
I wish we had that on video. Her in a headset jumping like some bad club kid, right? You know,
We had a guy that was taller. He was Phil. He was a pretty tall guy.
Yeah.
He's a tall guy, and he's like, "Oh, I can be even more efficient if I stand on a chair, right?" It's like, no. So he's like, "Well, I'm gonna jump," and he ends up punching the lights above him.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Phil is no longer allowed to jump in the studio.
But the thing is, those are different ways to solve those puzzles, but they're all doable without standing on a chair or without.
Yeah.
And I think they are. I mean, like, having experienced that, especially with the core tabletop, being able to move up and down, we're pretty cognizant of like when, where we place things.
Yeah. Now there was a really interesting one that came up about like paraplegics playing the game.
Yeah.
And well, I can't do that. So we were talking about like a device in game that could be used as like kind of like a grabber or a step ladder. Like I can physically place myself higher. I can virtually place myself higher in the space using devices that the player, some sort of step ladder or a little platform, or like grab something from a distance and then place it and rotate. So we've been talking about doing that for maybe like a future patch for Bounce.
Yeah, I mean, what Valve did when they did their first as a robot repair thing, right? They had it where you can actually extend the controller out from where you were, right? So you actually see the controller move. So we were thinking about possibly allowing you turn this setting on, and they gave you a little bit more reach. So even though your height is not taller, you can reach a little bit higher. So that was another possibility.
Yeah.
So, but that is something that we actually, it's funny you mentioned it is something that we are very cognizant of as we move forward on all our projects.
Yeah.
Mars Odyssey, we didn't have to worry about it too much because there wasn't any real game mechanics there. So even if the height was a little bit, you were a little too short, or it was okay, what we were asking them to do is more of a sort of a virtual experience. We hate that phrase, edutainment. I hate it too, but experience, right? But you got to throw the word educational. But you don't want to not have entertainment in there. I don't know.
Yeah,
somebody needs to point about it.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought about making accessibility tools in the game itself before. That's a really cool solution.
Yeah, something I'd like to ask all of VR developers now in 2017 is that, like, we just saw the year of VR, right? Like, all the headsets hit last year. You know, everyone got to launch their games. There's marketplaces now that are in swing in a big way. Some developers are excited about it. Some are sort of let down by the way things went. And, you know, as a studio that's been doing this for years with multiple VR titles under your belt, like, how do you feel about the state of the VR marketplace? Like, did it meet your expectations? Are you worried at all? Are you psyched?
We still need to do our side projects.
Yeah, I mean, we knew, and we were pretty honest about the assessment. Everybody was on a high when all the headsets came out. I think we were pretty aware of saying, okay, there's always an initial, like when any new medium comes out, there's always going to be an initial big bump. But you had some prognosticators saying, oh, they're going to sell millions of units, and we were like, listen, it's going to probably be a slow burn up until about 2018, maybe 2019, till you start to really hit traction with a wider user base. So, for us, our main focus is VR entertainment. But at the same time, we also do side to sort of keep the revenue coming in. We have side projects, work for hire projects.
We do art assets. We
engineering work for other companies.
Yeah. We have an installation project going on.
Yeah,
right now.
We have that going on. And on top of that, we also have never thrown out the idea of saying, you know what, we love VR, it's our main focus, but we may want to do a smaller PC console game that's not VR. We don't at any time never want to just limit ourselves to one medium or another. We are in love with VR, and we know it will take off. I mean, if you think about it, everybody sometimes needs to step back, I think, and take a look at the big picture. Think about the end of 2014, right? If you ask the average person what VR was, they really wouldn't know too much about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
People in the industry and we're like, oh, well, there's the Rift. There's Oculus Rift, right? This is this sort of, they kickstarted it and there's this thing, but nobody was even sure that was going to take off, right? Because we've had the promise of VR forever. Fast forward basically 2 years, right? And now we're talking about PlayStation has their headset, okay? We have the Vive and Oculus on the high-end PC, and it's the first iteration of the hardware. I was explaining to somebody before, it's like...
Well, there was the Virtual Boy.
The Virtual Boy.
I got to try one of those for the first time last fall, and it was wild.
Yeah.
That's a word you could use for that, yeah.
But it was red.
It was really red, yeah.
If you think about the game industry, we have mobile games, console games, PC games, right? They tend to
tabletop games.
And tabletop games. But what VR now has is that you have the Daydream from Google, you have the Gear VR, which is very successful, right? So you have the mobile stuff. You have PlayStation VR that's on the console. And then you have, the two heavy hitters with PC. Razer has one coming out as well. So the ecosystem.
What's Xbox going to do next?
Yeah, what's Microsoft going to do? I mean, they have the HoloLens, which we have in studio. We're all still at the very infancy of this medium. And I think it's the genie's now out of the lamp. I mean, everybody who experiences VR loves it. The adoption rates will go up, but it wasn't what like I said, the initial people or some of the initial people expected. Some of the people actually were pretty much accurate as to where they thought we were going to be at the end of 2016.
Yeah.
It's getting there. My analogy for hardware was I remember getting the first VCR. I don't know if you guys are old enough for that.
Yeah, I had a VCR. Yes, I am not a baby.
So, right, I remember like 1979, and the VCR was basically like the size of a refrigerator. It was like $1,000 back then.
They still work. If you keep clean on those
still,
things are robust.
Right.
Yeah, my mom probably still has hers.
And then think about 5 years, 10 years after that fact. It's like I can go and buy a $60 VCR.
Yeah.
Who buys VCRs anymore? And now you have a lot of the big players playing. You have Samsung, a lot of backing behind that. You have Facebook. You have HTC with Valve. You have Sony. There's a lot of the players that you need to push it are in this industry right now. So I think that's also the really important thing. But the proof's in the pudding. We've had people who are like, VR, I don't really. You put it on, they're like, holy shit, that's amazing. Right, and I think that's that moment. We've seen that. We've had hundreds of people like I said, we were lucky enough to have the Vive very early on. I think there was a point where we were one of only a couple Vives in all of California. And we had tons of people come in, and there was not a single person in the hundreds of people that we demoed that said, I could take it or leave it.
I would also add that nobody's figured out how to market their games well, us included. Like, putting out a video of, like, Bounce, for example, it is just not the same as putting on the helmet and being in that same space.
Right.
You know, so people doing, like, the multimedia videos, like, that gets you a little closer, but unless you're actually looking at it in VR, you have no idea how amazing it can be.
And then some people say, yeah, do a demo, and then there's all sorts of concepts about, is a demo good for revenue? Is a demo not good for revenue? Does it so it's a whole new, the business side of things sort of has to is always behind the technology.
Those are some very thoughtful answers, and thank you for sharing like some of your own struggles with us. Since we know it's a lot for developers to essentially admit that it's hard. You always want to tell everyone you're easy, so the investors give you more money, and so you can keep making stuff. But thanks for sharing that part. From the chat, we have two questions I would like to get to. So first, we're going to get to rhetorics, which is for everyone in the room. Could you talk about the changes of character design challenges within VR spaces versus the work you're used to doing?
Yeah.
I assume this is general character design.
General character design. I mean, I don't think it's that much of a difference. I mean, you have to account for, if you make a film character, right? And even I think game character, you're not building that character to a camera, right? You want to make sure that it looks good. Now, in VR,
it has to hold up.
It has to hold up if I get in really, really close. So the thing is that if you're depending on what your project is, what you're trying to accomplish, you may err on the side of building characters closer to how film studios build their characters, which is inherently more complicated, right? Because the thing is beyond just the visual, textural qualities of the character. It's a matter of the animation, right? When we do a game animation, if you know that this character is never going to be closer than sort of mid-close, right? You can get away with losing a little bit of the articulation in the facial animations, right? Because I'm kind of seeing it as if it's a TV screen that's like 15 feet away, right? So,
and you can cheat in film.
Right.
You can cheat a lot in film, and it's a little harder in VR when somebody can move around your model and check from every angle and say, oh, that shoulder pad's just crashing through his head.
So
you gotta get.
But there's a bunch of different choices you can make. You can make an artistic choice and say, like I think Quar is a prime example of making it where they're simpler, stylized characters, right? Where they're not meant to be photos. So even close up, since it's stylized, you have a little bit of forgiveness, right? You're not looking at a creature that you would expect to be sort of photoreal.
Yeah.
Same thing, I think, if you're going to do a human. My thing is like, yes, you want to have, there's all the different kinds of things that you can apply to a character in 3D to make it realistic. Subsurface, you want to get technical, subsurface scattering, making sure that your textures are, at 8K, things like that. But to me, the realism comes from the animation. And animation, for those who don't know the industry very well, animation's great. Animations is only good as the rig, meaning that the ability that model has to articulate, right? Hitting the different phonemes, being able to get all the different muscle movements.
Avoiding uncanny valley.
Avoiding the uncanny valley. I mean, mouth animation. If I remember correctly from my old animatic days, there's over 100 micro muscles just around the mouth itself. You can never, even in film, you can't ever replicate that unless you're doing full mocap, right? So I think it's just a matter of, we have to start thinking about it. If this character is something that needs to be close up to the VR camera, that we're going to be able to walk around, you're going to have to allocate more resources and time, right? Quite a bit more, from your modeling to your shading to your articulation to your animation. and then making sure that that level of detail has to persist around you as well. So it becomes complicated. It's a house of cards, right? You start making one thing, that falls off. It's going to all come down.
Chris, I just want to throw that question to you as well. How has it affected your work and the way it's changed?
I guess to reiterate what Andrew was saying, it is relatively the same as far as how we go through the pipeline. Where I see a lot of back and forth happening is between the person that's rigging and the person that's animating. We have a whole lot of collaboration going on there so that the animators can actually do what they need to do to make it look good in VR. So there will be, an iteration where we look at it in VR and go, wait, we got to go back and fix this rig. So then we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to make this rig, adjust it so that we can make it hit whatever we need it to do. So I see a lot of back and forth in that realm.
And Chris is uniquely positioned, actually. She has a good vantage point because before working with us, where were you? What did you work on, Chris?
I was on Star Wars: The Clone Wars.
For how long?
7 years.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole thing.
So, yes. So she knows character animation for episodics, right? Which is actually, it's different than film, but it's actually closer to probably what we do than it is to film. But
we have way tighter deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So that's why she's always calm and the rest. Yes.
That's not cool and calm.
That's cool and calm, right? That's true.
Right on. Thank you all for sharing those answers. The next question comes from Iceman 42812. Iceman, I think, is actually familiar with their work because when they dropped in the chat earlier, they said, "Woo, steel wool." And I don't think they were just referring to steel wool in general. They were talking about you all. Iceman's question is, what do you think it will take to get the bigger IPs to take the risk of getting into VR? Right now, the only expected big IP is Bethesda's Fallout 4 coming to VR. And just as an addendum to this question, I know you all have a new big IP-based project you're working on without killing your NDA and putting you all in trouble. Are you able to share anything about what big IP owners, but big people who own very recognizable characters and stories, are interested in when they want to get into VR?
All right. So the first question is when are the big AAA titles coming?
Yeah.
Okay. I think Gabe just announced that Valve is working on 3 VR titles, not ports, not a game that they're making that's going to port. It's going to be a VR title.
Yeah, he told Alex that. He told Alex right here that yesterday.
He told a lot of people. I was there yesterday at Valve when we talked about that.
Right. So I mean, that is always right. I mean, now Valve is also inherently interested in the success of the Vive and VR in general, right? They're on, above being a software game portal, they're game makers, right? I mean, so they're excited about it. There's a commitment there. So I think, when are the other ones? When is EA coming into the fold? When is Activision? I don't know.
I mean, Capcom with Resident Evil was kind of kicking it off.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we're starting to see the beginning of it because if you think about it initially, why would a AAA title is very expensive? Right? I mean, our budgets are nowhere near. We're still much more indie than we would ever be. A AAA title.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with having to explain a 10 to 15 to 20 to 30, $40 million budget, and you're saying, okay, well, we're hitting this particular hardware demographic, and they're looking at the numbers of adoption rates. They're like, what? Okay, we can maybe take a game that we're making and port it over, which is not necessarily the same as saying, I am making the AAA title VR game for PlayStation VR, Oculus. So from a business point of view, you completely understand where they're hesitant to commit that kind of resources. I mean, this is a business in which you have a couple bad titles, your studio can go under. I don't care who you are, actually. Yeah. Right? I mean, even in film, right? You look at film animation studios, a couple bad hits, they're under. So it's hard. You have to succeed. The AAA title you can live by a AAA title, but you can die by your AAA title. So, but I think though, like you said, Capcom Valve. I think the other ones are going to start, seeing that the adoption rates are going up, and they're going to have to project where they imagine it going. So it's coming, not as soon as everybody expected. But once again, let's step back and say, remember, at the end of 2014, there was no VR, right? There was, everything was, it didn't really exist. It was still theoretical. 2 years later, and a AAA title, it does not take, 6 months to make a AAA title. If we're talking a real title, it takes years. So,
and without giving anything away for our upcoming project, I would say that the thing that IP holder was most attracted to was us saying, hey, people have seen your characters for years. Have they ever seen them like this? And we showed them a demo standing next to the characters that they had created, and whoa!
Stop! You're
nervous.
Stop!
That's where I ended, and that's where I ended.
Stop!
You go, oh my god!
Stop! Just shh. Yeah, what he said.
That was.
He's drinking booze.
Thank you for. I hope we didn't give your legal department any trouble, but I actually want to say that was genuinely helpful in that it helps to understand what it takes to convince someone about VR. I think sometimes, where Alex and I are in the business of trying to explain ideas to other people, and sometimes, we get caught up in the vernacular that we're used to. It's like, how do you convince someone that VR is worth it? And I think the idea of I'm just going to take one of the things that wowed me. Well, I'm just trying to think of something that wowed me in VR. When Industrial Light and Magic put out that little Star Wars demo they had, standing next to the Millennium Falcon was pretty freaking cool. Like I understand that sentiment that you're talking about.
Yeah, and on the point of where VR is at and the growth potential, I think you're right on with what Valve is trying to accomplish. We have a couple stories up on the sites today because we were up at Valve in Bellevue yesterday, and Gabe did say they're literally trying to make games that they hope will be appealing to millions of people, because that is what he sees as being the driving force in expanding the VR market. It's not in lowering the cost of headsets. It's in creating enough reasons for people to buy headsets. And I think that's probably how it's going to go. He even said, I have the quote here now. It's we're further down the road than we were a year ago, but it's just going to be this slow, kind of painful fits and starts kind of thing.
Isn't that life? Isn't that just life?
Everybody wants the instant gratification. Everybody wants to have everything now, and we understand that, right? We all are guilty of those things. But like I said, I've seen, where I started with VR was at Valve, being shown the prototype.
Right.
And I remember Josh and I were up there, and when I took the headset off, now at that point, our partner Josh already had the Rift, and he was like, "This is pretty cool." Wasn't sure, if it was going to really take off or if it was going to be like 3D films where it was sort of a gimmick. When I walked out of the demo at Valve, I was sort of speechless, and I knew that it's going to happen, and this is sort of the starting point now, right? But whether it's going to take 1 or 2 years, 3 or 4 years, that I couldn't tell you. But I think Gabe is right. I mean, we are a lot further than we were a year. Definitely 2 years ago, there's nothing there. And where are we going to be in 2 years from now? I mean, think about that. I mean, think about the titles that will come out. Think about the hardware iterations that'll come out. We're in a really good position. For devs, it's hard, right? I mean, you're looking for revenue now. Like I said, our business was always predicated on understanding that we'll get there because we believe in the technology, we believe in the medium, but we still have to sort of buffer that a little bit by making sure we do work for hire, do external projects, things like that, to sort of weather the initial storm. Because we still want to make sure that when the adoption rate is finally there, we're one of the companies that are standing and been on the forefront. We've been developing for the Vive longer than almost any other studio that exists right now. Right? I mean, we were one of the original people to get the prototype.
Yeah.
So we were lucky and blessed to get that, and that gives us the longest amount of time working in VR, I think. So And there's a lot of great stuff out there now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there, and it's exciting.
I will say before we have to start wrapping up, but I will say my personal hope for VR is that one day I'll get to have a really, really good Pacific Rim experience. That's what I want in VR. I want to be in a Jaeger. I know they have one. I know Legendary has their one, but I really want to be in that giant robot.
Yeah. But would you be a good robot, or would you just turn on humanity and just start smashing things like Rampage? See, that's...
Oh no, I want to go like full Pacific Rim, like saving humanity. Like I don't want to rampage. I want to like be like have that experience with the kaiju. Like I saw one demo. I saw a test demo that was kind of mimicking it. Like you were looking out the visor and you were holding them, and then the arms. You would swing your arms. You would see the controller in the demo like move with the real controller, and then outside the window you would see the Jaeger hand move. And it was just some indie dev messing around, but I was already like, I want that.
So don't you have, for it to be truly Pacific Rim, you have to have two vibes?
Yeah.
Two people playing at the same time.
Yes, I'm all in.
Right, that would be awesome.
Before we wrap up this show, Rhetoric asked one question I was going to pass over, but then it was too good to pass. For a small developer who wants to focus on VR, what's your advice for them? And I'd love to hear each of you weigh in with what your advice is for a small developer.
Well, you start that one.
I mean, right now the access to the tools are almost free. I mean, the cost actually is the hardware. So as long as you have you have the PC to run the hardware, you have the headset, you have access to Unity, you have access to Unreal. It also depends. I mean, if you're somebody who has a little bit of coding background, that's great, because when it comes to art, there's tons of communities out there where you can find people that can work for free, and maybe you can get together and work on a collaborative project. Mm-hmm. If you want to run things solo, it becomes a little bit harder, right? I mean, if I were to sort of say, okay, I just want to do Unity and make my own thing individually, it's like my wall would be, okay, well, I don't know how to code in C#. I mean, I can use prefabs and things like that. This is the most accessible I think it's ever been for anybody to go into and make a small experience, right? It doesn't take much. Actually, honestly, the truth is it doesn't even take much coding to say I want to build a little diorama or a little bit of a simple shooter that I can go and download some free plugins from Unity or Unreal that gives me the ability to do that. My thing is just what interests you? What gameplay interests you? Are you just in it to see something really cool? Are you in it to focus on the game mechanics? Right? That would be my thing. Is always to ask is like, why do you want to do this? Is it the cool factor? Is it because you love games and you love game mechanics? And then I would say, okay, well, focus on what's important to you first. If it's just visual, then make cool stuff and walk around it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's about your passion for whatever direction you want to go. You have to have that passion. Otherwise, that's not going to reflect in your work.
Yeah. I'd say work on your own projects, and if one seems like it's suitable for VR, then go talk to a small
Jason.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like usually it's
real quick. Sorry, I'm doing the thing I said about tripping.
Yep,
so at my end, I don't know if it happened for anyone else, but Jason's answer got eaten up by some kind of lag, so it just turned into that.
That's exactly what I said.
Jason, if you could repeat your answer, please.
I was just saying that go develop a game that you like.
Yeah.
Like whether it's tabletop or PC or whatever. Not every project is going to be suitable for VR, right?
Yeah.
If you want to do something in VR, or you think that your project would benefit from being in VR, go find a little indie developer. I think people are pretty accessible right now. Like, if somebody came to us and said, hey, I got this thing I want to show you guys, there'd be a bunch of paperwork, but maybe we would talk to them about it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and find friends. I mean, that's the thing. It's like if you tend to be somebody who has desires to make games in Unity or Unreal or VR, chances are you probably are around a community or know people who have similar interests. We built Fly Hunter, our first title, which is a mobile game, completely remote, right? We survived. We built the game on Skype and Dropbox.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, because
Yeah.
the guy at Pixar, we had to work late at night. Our publisher was in the UK.
We couldn't use anything from the studio. We had to be totally separate. So yeah, it was Skype at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, cool. Thank you all for the good advice. Thank you all for joining us. That was a great talk. Thank you all, and I look forward to your talk at GDC.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, look forward to meeting you there.
Yeah,
it'd be cool.
Real quick, time to do all the show wrap-up stuff. Thank you, everyone, for wasting another perfectly good hour on the Gamasutra Twitch channel. If you liked this discussion we had today, we encourage you to go down and click the subscribe button, because if you do that, you'll get a notification every time we're live talking to wonderful people like the Steel Wool team here, or when we're just talking with each other about what's going on in video game news, or when we are playing some cool games. Other things I want to remind you about, if you look down below, I've put on the button where it says see their talk. You can go to the talk description and get details on what time their talk is and where is it. Do you all remember when and where your talk is at GDC?
Monday, I believe we have, is it the 9:30 slot or 10
In San Francisco.
Solid.
So
that's why she's in charge, and we don't do anything.
and that's also why I did put that button down below for anyone watching to check out that get that information. Look down below. And while we're at it, I just do briefly need to mention that Gamasutra and GDC are sibling organizations under UBM Americas, so we're the same organization, etc., etc. Disclosure. With that, thank you for joining us. Thank you all in the chat. It's been fun. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.